I think people need to be involved in, looking at the community and be involved in trying to clean up these polluted waterways. Newtown is, I know some sites in there are already slated as Superfund sites, which means that they're so polluted that the federal government has to step in and remediate the soil or the water in the immediate area before it can be reused for any other type of either industry or residential use. And this is of the 22 Superfund sites in New York City, I think more than 11 of them are in Brooklyn alone. So we have to reclaim these abandoned sites, but I think even more broadly than that, there has to be some type of plan, some type of goal, some type of idea that people are aspiring to. Do they want to convert the land around the area into a promenade? Do they want to convert it into open space? Do they want to just convert it back into industrial use? But it's this indecision about what to do with the waterfront that has caused Brooklyn's waterfront to remain stagnant, and basically in a stagnant state it just dilapidates into the state that's in now. Many of the piers are just falling and crumbling into the water. We're currently working with Pickett, which is a Pratt Institute Community Center for Environmental Development, trying to convert or trying to have property owners give up about 20 feet worth of property that border around the canal, and trying to convert that into an open space, whether it be a walkway or a promenade, or whether or not they're going to take the remaining property behind that 20 feet and build cafes or other types of low-impact environmental or industries or businesses. As you can see here, the water is strewn with both floatables, oil, there may be petroleum products, PAHs, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which are things you really can't see, disease organisms coming out of the combined sewer overflows that go throughout the city. Things like typhus, cholera, I'm sure hepatitis from these sewer releases. And these are things that keep people and keep industry, for the most part, from coming back to the area, is because once you have your industry there, you're inheriting the past crimes of all the other industries that have been there and have been polluting for the last 100, 150 years. And no one's really willing to take that responsibility. You have bulkheads that are falling in, which are actually the property owner's responsibility to maintain. The city, for the most part, in the past, 70 years, has never fined anyone for their bulkheads falling in, as long as no one steps on it and it falls in and sues the property owner. But the city is we're initiating a plan with Pickett, like I mentioned, for the property owners to give up their bulkheads, therefore releasing them from the liability of someone accidentally falling in from their bulkhead collapsing, but then being able to give the city the opportunity to make a citywide or region-wide plan and course of action as to what to do with that 20-foot space in front of the bulkheads. But you can convert that 20-foot space into a bike path, into a walkway, which can be used by the residents. Those beautiful vistas, a beautiful scene of Manhattan. People in Manhattan, they have all this waterfront property, but then they have to look on Brooklyn. And wouldn't it be good if we could get that same waterfront property, build a park or a recreation area, and then have the beautiful view of Manhattan for everyone to enjoy? Now, there's a whole process that goes involved in trying to reclaim, especially something as extensive as Newtown Creek. I think the first process would be to clean the water, and that has several stages. That means both bringing oxygen back to the water, which is something that they're doing in Gowanus by reactivating the flushing tunnel. They hope to bring oxygen back into the water. Because you have to remember, these are all systems, and once you have oxygen in the water, then you can have plankton in the water, and these plankton can then feed fish, and then these fish can bring back water birds, waterfowl. So you have to treat the whole body as a system, taking it a stage at a time in order to try to bring back a quality. But then beyond the water itself, you have to deal with the sediments that are polluted. And the sediments may have things as bad things as cadmium, lead, mercury, petroleum, like I mentioned before. And that material comes into contact with the water. So besides treating the water, you're going to have to treat the sediments. And that's a whole process in itself, because in 1990, I believe 1992, we could no longer dump our dredged material back into the ocean, which we had been doing previous to that. And now that dredged material is contaminated, so that material has to go to a special waste disposal site. And there aren't that many located in the United States, and they're very expensive. And then you have to cart all your dredged material either down the East River or through neighborhoods in dump trucks. And no one wants that coming through their neighborhood. It's bad enough they have all the waste transfer stations, not to be compounded with additional trucks carting hazardous material. But that material has to be dealt with in some way. And I think technology is advancing now that we have ways to deal with the material. It's just that no one wants to invest the money. You know, many of the residents in the community are recent immigrants and/or are immigrants, or transients, which are people who may, you know, have moved to Williamsburg or Greenpoint, but then, you know, after a couple of years or after a generation, they move out. So there's not that, you know, stable relationship with their Congress people and the elected officials. So the elected officials figure, well, we can just do whatever we want. We don't, you know, we're not worrying about them in the next 10, 15 years. There is a process known as vitrification, which can deal with dredged materials. What they do is they take the dredged material, they dewater it, then they cook it at a very high temperature basically in a kennel. They mix in a couple of other, like silicon or silica, into the dredged material, and then it's cooked and sealed into a glass matrix. Therefore, this new material is no longer hazardous. You can actually touch it. You can actually do something with it. And a lot of companies, there's one based in Pennsylvania that takes the same dredged material, vitrifies it, and then they crush it, and they make a type of Portland cement, or you can make ceramic tiles with it. You can use it as glassfault, which is all of our asphalt today is actually recycled glass. That's why it shines so much in the sun. It's actually bits of glass, and you can use the same material in the same manner. It can be recycled. It's no longer toxic to come into contact with. There's a group out of MIT that's been doing this same vitrification process using nuclear waste in Nevada, taking samples, bringing it to Boston, and running the same test. And they've actually designed a portable vitrification plant which can deal with the dredged material, and then once they finish doing one spot, they can move it and keep moving it to different locations and cleaning up the water that way. But no one's really talking about these kinds of processes. I mean, there's a whole economy involved in doing this. You can set up a factory that can actually produce take the raw materials and produce some type of commodity, whether it be cement or ceramic tiles, like I mentioned. But basically, the way it would work is they would dredge the material, dewater it on site, dewater it, which is taking out most of the water, and then cook it at a site, maybe up the canal or down the canal, doesn't matter. Some of these canals are, I mean, if you're talking about the Gowanus canals, it's very short, so they can have it at the beginning or the end of the canal and move it along as they see. But then bring it on this portable plant, which could be floated on a barge and or set up right on one of the vacant lots in the area. Then vitrify the material. Out comes this raw glass matrix material. Then that can be taken to a factory or another place to be turned into whatever the raw material may be, whether it be, you know, like I said, cement or ceramic tile or glass fault or whatever it may be. And that's how it would work. And then once they finished, dredging a material that's considered toxic, then they can move it and to another site, and it doesn't no longer has to stay in the community, being like one of these plants or one of these factories or waste transfer stations, which seem to loom, and just after whatever their project is finished, you have this freestanding building that's being used no more and becomes another eyesore for the community. I saw this whole process take place on the Discovery Channel. They were running a program on vitrification, and this plant, this portable plant, they can do up to about 2 tons a day at a cost of only $50 a day in electrical power that would be needed to run this plant. So it's, as you can see, it's very cost effective when you're talking about obviously a canal of this size, and maybe several thousand tons, or maybe even actually probably about 1 million tons of material that may need to be dredged. But that can be done within a year, or 2 or 3 years. But the ideal thing is that once they've finished, they can move the plant elsewhere, and you're not laden with a factory that had to be built specifically for this purpose and then can no longer be used for anything else. So all of New York City is faced with this problem, and they think it's going to be millions upon millions of dollars in order to dredge the material and send it to these special landfill sites, because most of New York City's sediments are polluted and are considered hazardous material. Since our Gowanus projects have been going on, we've had a lot of people come with alternate plans of action as what to deal with the dredged material. And one solution is these guys working with some former EPA biologists have, I guess, figured out that this certain type of bacteria or organism can actually eat up a lot of the toxic and remediate a lot of the toxic sediments that are in the canal biologically, whereas opposed to dredging it, which would just completely remove the sediments. They're saying that these organisms can actually attack the pollutant, the various pollutants that are in the sediment, and actually remediate the soil or remediate the sediment without necessarily removing it. And I've never seen this happen, and I don't know how they've come about these organisms, but obviously they would want to keep it secret, because if everybody knew, then they wouldn't be able to get paid off of it, Well, I liken the canal to, if anybody can remember, the San Antonio River Walk, where that canal was completely polluted, almost beyond repair, and they've slowly spent millions and millions of dollars, I guess, in trying to remediate the canal water, building different types of bridges over the canal, reminiscent of Venice. Now they have gondolas coming up and down. These are the visions I see for the canal. People taking gondola rides up and down it. Many of the basins now, if left unchecked, would probably revert back to their pre-man stage, I guess is the best way to say it, where many of these inlets would be estuaries for fisheries, where both shellfish and ocean-going fish could lay their eggs and hatch to provide more, I guess, biodiversity to New York's waterways. But so we're thinking of taking a select amount of these inlets or basins and manually letting them revert back to a beachhead or some type of estuary to bring fish and waterfowl back to the area. I think both areas can be cleaned up. I like the fact that Gowanus is a lot smaller, so it becomes a test site, and you can see what works and what doesn't work, and those kinds of things. But I mean, this technology can be applied, I think, to all the waterways around the city that are open to the ocean or into the river.
Hold up the secchi desk, Babu. Okay, now this sensor is lowered into the water on a graduated rope with a knot every foot. And he counts the knots and he lowers it gradually until he can't see it anymore. And this is the way that one measures water quality, water clarity. And I'm going to turn things over to Abu, who's going to introduce you to problems of water quality that's embodied in the water itself, in the silt at the bottom and sides of the canal, and in these shallow side basins, and implications for the life that lives in them, that might live in them.
I've run various water tests on the canal, both at the mouth and at the head of it. And obviously at the head, or the part that's most inland, is actually more polluted. But even at the mouth of the canal in Gowanus Bay, where people fish often, I've seen, there's a lot of the water quality. You know, dissolved oxygen, clarity, pH, all those indicators, those chemical indicators of the water, say that, you know, the water is not that bad. It's actually almost passable. But I don't think those are the real indicators I'm worried about. I'm really worried about, you know, from the CSOs, all the pathogens that may be in the water, that, you know, things that EPA, DEP, and DEC don't test for, you know, mainly because they don't have the chemists there, you know, to be doing the testing. But they never test for pathogens. They don't test for hepatitis. They don't test for cholera. They don't test for typhus. These are the things that you will see in water bodies around CSO events, because you have all this new influx of you know, material. I want to see feces, but, you know, those are the kinds of things that come out of the sewer end, and that are found in the heads of the canal, in the heads of different areas, that aren't being regularly flushed by the current. So I think the further in you go, inland, the worse the water quality is, and, you know, and it doesn't take that much money. We have, I know we spent, we invest. Wait, well, how much money is the Environmental Bond Act? $1.6 billion, something like that. And New York City has gotten less than 10% of all of that money, which means the rest of the money is actually going to industries upstate, whereas New Yorkers have voted overwhelmingly for the Bond Act, well over the number of people that voted for it in New York State, yet they're receiving most of the funding to clean up most of their toxic sites. And I think Newtown Creek is a perfect example as to where the money can go to. When you're talking about $700 million alone in water quality projects, you know, even if, you know, 1% of that money was given to testing and into cleaning up Newtown, I think you see a tremendous difference. But you know, I mean, I know one part of the money is going towards what are we going to do after Fresh Kills is closed and all these waste transfer stations. But if they're citing them in, you know, Greenpoint, you know, which has what, 23 now of the 55, I think. You know, almost half of all the waste transfer stations for all of New York City are in Greenpoint and Williamsburg. And they're actually adding, I think they're going to add another one if Giuliani has his way. Then, you know, what are we going to do? You know, some of that money should be going to remediating some of the problems, not adding more problems into the equation. And I think, you know, when it comes to especially this Bond Act money, I think Giuliani and Pataki cut a deal with each other, you know, behind closed doors, where Giuliani promised that he wouldn't tap into the Bond Act money that was given to the whole state in exchange for maybe something else that Pataki is doing for him. I don't know what the deal is, but I mean, if you're sitting on $1.6 million, I mean billion dollars, not $1 million, but $1.6 billion, and you're not asking for any of it, and you're claiming that there are all these problems with, you know, schools, and there are all these problems with environmental problems such as Newtown Creek. And Newtown Creek is just one problem, you know, in a slew of other problems that are facing New York City. You know, high lead poisoning rates in neighborhoods, these kinds of things where Bond Act money can go towards. If he's not even asking for that money, I mean, there has to be some underlying reason why not. And I don't know I wasn't there at that meeting, so I can't tell you what that's about. But, you know, there has to be a reason for it.
Skimmer boats come and pick up floatable material that comes out of the CSO and gets collected in that boom. And at the head of Maspeth, when he comes around again, you'll be able to see the CSO that discharges here and produces or distributes those floatables to the water body. It's for floatable material that comes out of the CSO. It extends down 18 inches, I think, or so, and anything that's floating on the surface when the water comes out of the CSO gets captured there rather than coming out into open water. The area is served by combined sewer systems, which means the wet weather flow goes into the same sewers that carries the dry weather flow to the plant. And the wet weather flow is a lot more quantity than the dry weather flow. The sewers are designed to carry it to a certain point, but the plant can't treat it. And so there are these overflow points at different points in the system to give it relief so that you don't have to build a treatment plant that would be capable of treating, I don't know, 600 or 700 million gallons instead of 300 million gallons a day. You know, I mean, the creek is rated by the state standards for fish survival, not for breeding, not for any population, not for recreational use. It's only that it has to have enough oxygen so that fish can survive if they happen to come in. And during the summertime, when you get up a little further, it doesn't meet that criteria. It's not supposed to be for recreational use. That's not one of the designated uses. It's not viewed by the state as being appropriate for recreational use because of the nature of the shoreline mainly. So the state has standards that are set based on what they believe is the best use of the water body. And you know, whether it's swimming, whether it's boating, whether it's shell fishing, or whether it's nothing recreational at all. And this one is rated SD, which is the lowest classification they give, and that means that nothing human happens here. I mean, recreationally speaking. When we were doing the CSO study here, we did a lot of sampling up and down the creek, and those reports have been given to DEP, and they've been put at various repositories and libraries around the city for. The sediment is apparently contaminated. The requirements now for disposal of the material require that it pass a bioassay test because it would be disposed of in waters where the biological organisms are important, and it can't pass that test now, and so it would have to be treated and disposed of on land, and depends on the criteria for the disposal point, what kind of treatment would have to be given to it first. But it also requires that somebody have the authority and the responsibility to dredge it, and there is nobody except the Corps of Engineers, I guess, that has that authority. DEP may take some of the authority for the areas that are right near outfalls, because they can say that material is material that was discharged from the outfall primarily, and they will then clean up that, and that's part of their plans in a lot of the areas they had. It's not designated for recreational use. There is no harm, as far as I know, from taking a boat up here and spending a day on the water if all you want to do is spend it in the boat. It's not something that you would want to go swimming in because it's not regulated for anything like coliform, which is potentially a health hazard, and it's not well monitored for other materials that are toxic in another vein. We monitored all up and down the creek primarily for dissolved oxygen and other materials that are discharged from sanitary sewers typically, so solids and BOD, and we look at the oxygen, we looked at coliform, and it's not regulated for anything except oxygen. It has to maintain 3 milligrams per liter concentration of oxygen. But the thing is that the sediments near the CSOs we know are in large part discharged by the CSOs, which means they're sewage solids. And I wouldn't put my hand in sewage solids without gloves on. So I treat it the same way. Now out here, I think this water is more characteristic of the water in the East River than it is of the water near the ends of the CSOs. So the water itself here, particularly at this time of the year, is probably fairly decent. It probably has the required amount of oxygen in it. It's not designated for swimming. I don't think the East River is designated for swimming.